that we did this virtually. But I love having cameras on. I just, I think for me, because it gets depressing speaking into the black void. So let's go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us. Just a reminder before we start that the meeting will be recorded. Just leave your cameras on, but just leave your microphone off until you are ready to speak, just so that it doesn't interfere with anything else we have going on. So I am going to start with our opening prayer. Thank you, Andrea, for getting all of that up. Perfect. Okay, so if you'll join me in the sign of our faith, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. We come together in hope from different community groups, answering the same call to service, pieces of the same puzzle. We come together in gratitude for the trust placed in us, for the opportunity to serve, pieces of the same puzzle. We come together in respect, aware of our diversity, willing to work for the good, pieces of the same puzzle. We come together in awe of the wonder and beauty of each of God's children, pieces of the same puzzle. We come together in God's name, and as we work together toward the same goal, each piece of the puzzle begins to fit neatly into place, creating a breathtaking picture of love, compassion, courage, and grace. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, we will now go to our land acknowledgement.
Each of us has a relationship to the natural environment, the land, water, earth, the habitat, and ecosystems. Land acknowledgements provide us with an opportunity to offer recognition, respect to the original inhabitants of the regions that we live in and work on. There are many things that we can do to go beyond simply reading a land acknowledgement script. To make it more meaningful, we need to consider that we are, in fact, acknowledging not only the ancestral lands, but also the historical and complex intersections of settler impacts on Indigenous histories, economies, ecologies, livelihood, well-being, and governance structures. A territorial acknowledgement is not an endpoint in the journey of reconciliation. Actions create conditions for true reconciliation and create a foundation for restoring, renewing, or developing a new relationship with Indigenous peoples. For hundreds of years, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Attawaddaron, the Potawatomi, the Wendat, and Lenape nations have sought to walk gently on this land. They assisted the first European travelers to this territory and shared their knowledge for survival in what was, at times, a harsh climate. Under consultations from elders, knowledge holders from the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and 6 nations of the Grand River Territory, the Indigenous Education Advisory Committee, along with Halton Catholic District School Board, created this land acknowledgement.
Halton, as we know it today,
is rich in the history and modern traditions
of many First Nations and the Métis.
From the lands of the Anishinaabe
to the Attawaddaron,
the Haudenosaunee,
and the Métis.
These lands surrounding the Great Lakes
are steeped in Indigenous history.
As we gather today
on these treaty lands,
our Catholic social teachings
call us in solidarity
with our Indigenous brothers and sisters
to honor and respect
4 directions: lands, waters, plants, animals, and ancestors
that walked before us.
All these wonderful elements of creation exist,
gifted to us by our Creator God. We acknowledge and thank
the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation
for being stewards of this traditional territory.
Thank you so much, Andrea. So we're going to go ahead and get to down to business. So just a quick reminder, if when we do get to any items that require a mover and a seconder, if you, I'll just make sure that I say, if you don't happen to say your name out loud, I may just repeat your name so that we can capture it from the notes. So just letting you guys know. And I officially call the meeting to order. Like I said, we've done the land acknowledgement and the prayer. Now we need to do the approval of the agenda. So you'll see the agenda here on the screen in front of you. It will also have been in your meeting package. Was there any questions or comments or anything as it relates to the agenda itself? Seeing none, could I get a mover to approve the agenda?
I'll approve it.
Trish, so that's moved
Yes,
by
Trish.
Trish. Thank
Yep.
you, Trish. Can I get a seconder?
Rick will second.
Thanks, Rick. So moved by Trish, seconded by Rick. So resolved that the agenda has been accepted as received. Item number 2 is declarations of conflict of interest. Do we have any declarations of conflict of interest this evening? Okay, seeing none, we move on to item number 3. So we are moving right into our presentations this evening. It's my pleasure to welcome Superintendent Lofts. Aaron Lofts is the Superintendent of Business Services and the Treasurer of the Board, and he will be providing Budget 101 presentation to our SEAC committee this evening. Thanks for being here, Aaron.
Thanks, Trustee Agnew. Hi, everyone. I also like to welcome, if possible, our Senior Manager of Financial Services, Adam Cross, is on the line with me as well. So Perfect. He's going to go, both of us are going to go through the presentation. So Great. You don't have to listen to my voice the whole time. We'll be alternating. So.
Welcome, Adam, and thank you for being here as well. Aaron, just for housekeeping purposes, is it your preference to save all questions until the end, or if there's questions as we go, what is your preference?
I'm fine with as we go to keep it a little more organic. If you have the question, to bring it up at the time,
okay.
If that's okay. If it works with you, that's fine with me as well.
Okay, I'll keep my eye on the chat. Thanks so much, Aaron. Take it away.
Great. So we have a little presentation here for everyone. Now, just so everyone knows, we're going to be coming back, I believe, in April as well to kind of, once we get a little bit more information regarding the grants that are coming this year. But I'm going to look at the first 2 items. So the school board financial reporting cycles and the role of SEAC. Adam's going to look at enrollment, the balanced budget, the grants for student needs or GSN, which you might hear about, and the special education grant. And then I'll just look at the revenue and expenses, at least some tracking of the revenue and expenses for the past number of years, as well as the spec ed or special education funding shortfall, which is common across the province. Next slide. So the school board financing. So you can see in front of you, we have our reporting cycle. So we really have 3 main cycles throughout the year, at least for with respect to financial reporting. So our original budgets, we bring those in June. A lot of inputs involved with the trustees, with senior staff, with the organization in general, with constituents, with the population, through surveys and such. We bring all that information, collate that information, and bring it to board, hopefully by the end of June, unless there's another pandemic. We obviously don't hope we have that again. But typically we'll be bringing it in June for everyone, bring it before the Board of Trustees, go through all the presentations, and then ask the Board of Trustees to approve our budget. Now, we will be bringing draft budgets along the way. Typically, we'll at least bring 1 draft budget at the beginning of June, take some input from that, and then bring back the final budget for our second meeting in June. So the second Tuesday in June is when we typically would bring forward the budget for the upcoming year. So revised estimates. What are the revised budget estimates? So at the end of the first quarter, the ministry asks us to take a look at our enrollment, see where we're at, to kind of get a better idea of what we really expect our finances to be for the year, our budget to be for the year. So our main driver, everyone, for enrollment or for revenue is enrollment. Enrollment is by far our biggest driver for the revenue of a school board. So there's 2 data points in the year there, and I'll get into a bit more as we go through it. But October and March are our 2 big data points. So obviously in December, our first data point will be captured, the October enrollment. So that'll give us a much better idea of what our enrollment looks like for the upcoming year. And then our audited financial statements. So these are our actuals. So our first 2 are estimates. This is our actual. Our actuals, our fiscal year is August 31st. So we will have our cutoff August 31st, prepare all our statements, have our auditors come in, Deloitte is our auditor for the board. Our corporate auditor is Deloitte. They'll come in, look at our books, we'll report to the ministry, and we hopefully bring it back to our board of trustees to approve our financial statements in November, typically the second meeting in November. And then we publish it on our website and go from there. So that in a nutshell is our reporting cycle. It's a lot more work than just that, but those are the main dates anyways, with respect to our reporting cycle. So our next item we have is our budget process. So what's our process for the budget? So February, well, we're just finishing up on February right now. We talked to senior administration. So who's senior administration? Senior administration is our director, John Klein. I believe John's on the line tonight with us as well. All our superintendents, superintendents of the schools, Superintendent Ballo, our special education superintendent, myself, Colleen Oldman, our superintendent of human resources, Ryan Merrick. Everyone's involved in these meetings, as well as a few senior managers as well. So we also have Sita is involved in our senior meetings, as well as Andrea, who's responsible for senior manager of communications, are all part of that senior administration discussion. So we look at what our plan is, we discuss a plan, we bring that to senior administration, then we bring that to the trustees. And we brought this a couple of weeks ago to the trustees at a prior board meeting in February to at least get a ballpark of what we think our deadlines and our dates are. GSN announcements. Last year we were a little bit spoiled. We got our announcements in February. That was more of an anomaly than the norm. It was great to get it that early, but I don't think it's expectation. There also was an election last year that kind of helped us get the announcements a little earlier than typical. But I think typically we'll be seeing them more in March and April. And then stakeholder consultation. So our survey should be going out tomorrow. We'll be sending out our survey tomorrow to all of our population to request feedback on the upcoming year's budget. March and April, we begin with our trustee updates. We start looking at our enrollment. Enrollment, again, as we mentioned before, is our big, where our revenue comes from. It's all determined with our enrollment, I should say. So our data points, like I said, are October 31st and March 31st. We do our estimates for enrollment based on those two dates, and it's just a simple average of those two dates. So 50% from October 31st, 50% from March 31st, that's our average daily enrollment. And that's what our biggest driver is for revenue. Stakeholder consultation concludes, so our survey ends. Our research department will put together a report on all the consultation and all the feedback received and bring it back to our board of trustees. And we're looking at that to be brought back in April. Hopefully the first meeting, by at least the second meeting in April, we should have that information. Special Education Advisory Committee. So we're talking to you tonight. It is a new, I understand it's a lot of new members. So we thought it'd be important to do this kind of budget 101 to kind of get the first preliminary idea of how the budget process works. So like I said earlier, we'll be coming back again in April to bring back a little more, hopefully a fulsome information that we receive from the actual grants for this current year. And EFIS relief. So what's EFIS? EFIS is essentially where a lot of our calculations go from a budgetary perspective. It's where our revenue is generated with all that discussion regarding enrollment. It really helps us determine what our actual revenue, as well as to capture our expenses. So that's typically released in March or April. It's the GSN announcements I spoke of earlier. Usually they come out in conjunction, GSN announcements and then mentioning of the EFIS at the same time. So hopefully we get that announcement towards the end of March, if not the beginning of April. From everything we've been told by the ministry, we are to expect it the end of March, beginning of April, which is good. Good news. In May, we look at revenue and expenditure determination and start to look at trying to budget or balance our budget. And in June, like I mentioned before, we'll bring back a budget for the trustees to approve. And then by the end of June, we'll do Ministry 5. So we'll file all this information with the ministry. So we kind of just put this, Adam and I put together this stakeholder kind of a chart here to kind of understand the flow of information. So senior administration is in the middle there. We at senior admin, we will take information from the public to look at the priorities, budget holders, so budget holders throughout the board, programming needs and such, and provide information back to senior administration. The finance team kind of coordinates all that information, hopefully puts it in a readable form, at least we try to put it in a readable form for everybody, and then we provide that information to the Board of Trustees. Now, the Board of Trustees also provide information to us as well through both discussions with budget discussions. Trustee Agnew has been part of these in the past, and we hope to continue these going forward, or we will continue, not hope to, we will continue. And then we'll bring it back to board in, like I said, in June. So the role of SEAC. So role of SEAC, or the Special Education Advisory Committee, received the training on Spec Ed, on special education grants, revenues, expenditures, and the budget. We'll be bringing back more information in April once we have a little more concrete information on what the plan the ministry has for the upcoming year. Participate in public consultation on annual school board budgets. That's going out tomorrow. And then receive time information on the Spec Ed grants each year when the ministry releases the GSN. So again, this is what's going to be released hopefully in March, but probably more in April. This is continuing on. We will discuss the resources required to meet the needs of Spec Ed, and we'll provide feedback on how best to utilize. So Superintendent Ballo will take information I believe you'll be discussing later today and bring that back to the senior administration table to discuss further. I think I'm going to hand it over right now to Adam. He's going to look at our enrollment, which again is our biggest driver for revenue. Adam?
Thanks, Aaron, and thanks to the SEAC committee for allowing me to help Aaron walk through some of this budget information for you tonight. So as Aaron mentioned, day school enrollment is the key driver for most Ministry of Education grants. The table on this slide reflects the day school enrollment for the last 5 years, which with the 2022-2023 column being a mix of projections and that October 31st count date that Aaron alluded to. And as you can see, there's been a steady decline in enrollment for the last 4 years, in particular in the elementary panel. So since 2019-20, we've seen a decrease in enrollment of roughly 2.3% for our school board, which is a newer sort of phenomenon for Halton Catholic that we're navigating through. When it comes to how enrollment's used in our funding, you'll hear the term average daily enrollment. And as Aaron mentioned, there are 2 key count dates when determining average daily enrollment, the first one being October 31st, and the second one being March 31st. And essentially the formula is taking 50% of that count date information on October and adding it to 50% of that count date information for March to get the average daily enrollment. When we're talking about a budget surplus deficit, so there are 3 terms that you should be familiar with, those being a balanced budget, a compliant deficit budget, and a non-compliant deficit budget. Basically, in a balanced budget situation, your revenues equal your expenses for the year. In a compliant deficit budget, your revenues are less than your in-year expenses, but the deficit is lesser than a ministry prescribed formula, which is either it's the lesser of the prior year accumulated surplus or 1% of the current year operating revenue. When you're in this scenario, you are required to provide an in-year deficit plan to the ministry, showing how you will recover over the next 2 years. And then the last kind of category is the non-compliant deficit budget. And again, that's where your in-year revenues are less than your in-year expenses, but your deficit is greater than that formula, either the lesser of prior year accumulated surplus or the 1% of current year operating revenue. So what does that look like? So you can kind of see how that shakes out here on this slide. So a balanced budget is at 0. A surplus budget is when your revenues are greater than your expenses. That compliant budget is that period between 0 and the 1% in our case, which for 2022-2023 budget purposes was roughly $4 million. And then anything in excess of a $4 million deficit would put us into a non-compliant budget for the purposes of the ministry. Now, when we're talking about compliance, there are some subtle nuances with respect to this compliance calculation that the ministry does compared to our financial statements. So essentially, when the ministry is calculating the compliance of all school boards, they take the total revenues of the school board, they deduct the school generated funds revenue and any revenues recognized for the purchase of land. So these are education development charge revenue. For expenses, they add in an amortization of employee future benefit costs and interest accrued for capital debt. And again, they deduct the school generated fund expenses to determine our compliant or our revenue and our expenses for compliant purposes. And then they do the calculation of whether or not our revenue exceeds our expenses or if our expenses exceed our revenue. And then again, that's when we fall into the lesser of the board's accumulated surplus or the 1%. So to summarize, basically the Education Act requires the school boards to adopt a balanced budget for the fiscal year, unless the deficit can be covered by accumulated surplus from the prior years and is less than 1% of operating revenue. School boards that have a deficit are required to complete a financial recovery plan. So for 2022-2023 school year, Halton Catholic is in that compliant deficit budget area. So next we'll talk about grants for student needs. When we're looking at grants for student needs, this is how school boards in Ontario are funded. The Ministry of Education allocates funding to school boards each year based on a number of factors, some of which include student enrollment, the number of schools, the percentage of high need special education students, the number of students that have either English or French as their second language, and each board's unique geographical needs. The GSN funding formula, as Aaron kind of alluded to, is updated every year based on the provincial priorities, economic and program factors, and feedback from the annual GSN consultation, which the ministry collects feedback from various education stakeholders. This slide outlines the goals of the GSN, and they include fair allocation for all students across Ontario. Financial resources reflect the provincial priorities and vision. It allows school boards the flexibility to decide how funds can be allocated across programs in schools. There are some restrictions for certain grants provided for specific purposes, which we'll get into shortly. And it promotes accountability so that boards must report consistently on how spending has occurred. So there is some flexibility for school boards within the overall GSN allocation. The funding can be moved across categories so that local community needs can be met based on decisions by the board. There are a few exceptions in which funding can't be moved. This is called enveloping. Some of the key enveloped funds include special education, student achievement, and capital funding. The grants for student needs are broken out into a number of components, the largest being the Pupil Foundation grant. It comes in at approximately 51% of our overall GSN funding for Halton Catholic. It is a per pupil allocation, so it utilizes that average daily enrollment figure that we talked about, and it supports the elements of the classroom education that are required by and are generally common to all students. Basically, this grant covers any expenses related to the classroom experience. Another key component of the grants for student needs is the School Foundations grant, and this funds the in-school administration and leadership as well as school office supplies. So basically the non-classroom items required to run a school, including principal, vice principal, office staff, and office supplies. This grant represents approximately 6% of the GSN funding for Halton Catholic. And then we get into special purpose grants. So special purpose grants are designed to recognize the unique needs of boards through a wide variety of grants and supplements. Certain funding is targeted for exclusive purposes. So that's when we get into the enveloping. Special education is a great example of that, and we'll kind of get into the various components of the special education grant in a moment. But again, capital, so funding for new schools, additions, major repairs can also only be used for those purposes. This funding model also limits what the board can spend on board administration and governance. This cannot be more than the allocations provided. So we have to, in certain components of our grants, we can't use those funds to fund other initiatives. So we have to keep the funds for what its intended purpose. And then when it comes to the board admin and governance, there's restrictions or a cap on how much you can spend related to those administrative costs. The special education grant, just to highlight, is approximately 13% of our GSN for Halton Catholic. So these are, again, a list of some other special purpose grants that we receive funding for. The one that I'll highlight here relates to the cost adjustment and teacher qualifications and experience grant. So this grant also applies to all teaching staff, including special education resource teachers. Basically, we get extra funding based on certain employees' qualifications and experience. So the special education grant. So there are 6 components that make up the special education grant. It is a quite complex grant, and we'll walk through at a relatively high level tonight kind of what each component is, and then we'll show you kind of what our funding for each of these components look like in the past few years. So again, just a reminder, school boards may only use special education funding for special education programs, services, and or equipment. Any unspent special education grant funding in a given year must be put aside and spent on special education in the future. So school boards have the authority and flexibility to use the grants for student needs funding in addition to special education grant to meet their responsibilities to support students with special education needs. So as Aaron mentioned in the agenda, we'll talk about the shortfall that we are experiencing at Halton Catholic between what we spend on special education versus what we're currently funded for by the Ministry for Special Education. And that's where we can utilize some grants for student needs that aren't enveloped to help offset the growing needs in special education. So as I mentioned, there are the 6 components there, and we'll go through each one of these components in a bit more detail on the upcoming slides. So the first component is the special education per pupil amount. So this provides funding to assist with the cost of providing additional support to students with special education needs. It's allocated based on the school board's total enrollment, not just on students with special education needs. And this also outlines the 3 kind of rates that we receive per ADE for each of the grade categories listed. This equates to roughly 27.7 million for our 2022-2023 school year. When it comes to the next component, the differentiated special education needs amount allocation, so there are 4 main components within this component. The first one being the measures of variability in special education statistical prediction model. The next one is the base amount for collaboration and integration. There's a multidisciplinary amount and local special education priorities amounts. Again, there's the totals of each of the components. I'll just quickly go over what each of these stands for, because I know the titles don't really share what they might be. So when looking at the special education statistical prediction model, Basically, it estimates the likelihood of students in the school board needing special education programs and/or services. The model considers neighborhood profiles for all students across Ontario and in each school board, and predicts percentages for the population likely to have special education needs in each school board. And then we receive funding based on this. The measures of variability, that uses 7 categories of information to reflect differences in each school board's population of students with special education needs. 3 of the categories use data developed to develop a school board profile for special education needs. This is done by looking at different data sets and comparing a school board to the provincial average. These 3 categories are students reported to as receiving special education programs and services, participation and achievement in the EQAO assessments by special students with special education needs, and credit accumulation and participation in locally developed and alternative non-credit courses by students with special education needs. The remaining 4 categories address the school board's ability to respond to its population of students with special education needs. This is done by recognizing external factors that affect school board's ability to meet these needs. The 4 categories include remote and rural adjustment, the Indigenous adjustment, French language school board adjustment, and the Northern adjustment. We don't typically receive much with respect to those 4 categories. The base amount for collaboration and integration provides school boards with funding to help explore collaborative and integrated approaches to serving students with special education needs. The multidisciplinary supports amount provides funding to each school board for multidisciplinary teams of up to 4 staff. The team helps build board capacity, supports special education assessments, and helps teachers, education assistants, and other staff better understand and adapt to the unique needs of their students. And then finally, the local special education priorities amount is used by school boards to enhance supports for students with special education needs, addressing local priorities such as additional educational or professional and paraprofessional staff. So that includes special education resource teachers, education assistants, speech language pathologists, occupational therapists, a psychologist, amongst others. So there's a lot to kind of unpack in the differentiated special education needs, and it's more complicated calculation and formulas compared to the per pupil amount that we discussed previously. So the next component of the special education grant is the special equipment amount. There are 2 components to this allocation: a per pupil amount to purchase computerized equipment and related furniture, and a claims-based process that supports the purchase by school boards of other non-computer-based equipment, so hearing and vision supports, personal care supports, physical assist supports. And again, this outlines the 3 components there. So when it comes to, there is a board base amount, so that's the 20,000 that you see kind of in the middle, and then there's our claims-based amount of 500,000, and then our per pupil amount of 1.4 million. The next component is the special incident portion. This supports students with extraordinary high needs who require more than 2 full-time staff to address their health and/or safety needs, and those of others in their school. The funding for this is based on claims submitted by the school board. The next component is the education and community partnership allocation. Essentially, this provides supports for school-aged children and youth in care, treatment, or detention facilities for qualifying education programs. We don't receive any funding currently for this one. And the last component is the behavior expertise amount allocation. And this is this funding is for school boards to hire board level applied behavioral analysts, including board certified behavior analysts, to provide training opportunities that will build school board capacity. and to provide after-schools development programs for students with special education needs. So now I'll turn it back to Aaron to go over what all those items that I explained means in terms of Halton Catholic when it comes to revenues.
Thanks, Adam. So everyone, you can see that we have a spreadsheet or a slide here on our slide deck that kind of shows you where our revenue was going back to 2018-19, which really would have been our last pre-COVID year, and then where it's at today. One thing I will mention, as Adam showed in an earlier presentation, I have a slide coming up again on it, is our enrollment is essentially today what our December budget was. Our enrollment is the same or a little bit lower than it was back in 2018-19. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that our enrollment has not grown over that period of time. In fact, it's gone down over that period of time. You might say, well, then why did our special education grant allocation go up in that time if the majority of it's based to our average daily enrollment? Large part of that is different initiatives the ministry has offered, as well as changes in some of the staffing elements of that during that period of time. So we are staffed for compensation. The collective agreement just ended this past year, 21-22. So each year there was an increase in salaries throughout that year. But you can see across all those various areas that Adam spoke of before, so our per pupil amount has pretty much been stagnant. It's been the same. The differentiated special education needs amount, that has grown. That has grown a bit. The ministry has put additional funds into special education over the past number of years, particularly related to the COVID pandemic that we've gone through. But you can see on the whole, our revenue really hasn't grown tremendously over that period of time. In fact, it's actually quite a bit lower than what we brought back to the Board of Trustees back in June, given that our enrollment was actually lower than what we anticipated in June of this past year. The reason we're showing this now, it's really not something that we should probably get into too much tonight, but I thought it was important just to kind of give everyone an idea, especially because we have a lot of new people here, where our board is right now with respect to our revenue and our expenses. Adam did mention earlier that we are in a compliant deficit right now as a board, so which means we are using our reserve to pay for all of our budgetary requirements for this year. So the next couple of items, there's priority and partnership. What are priority and partnership? So these are elements that are outside the grants for student needs. So the ministry has allocated additional funds for certain projects and for certain areas that don't get captured in a grant for student needs. So they could be more temporary in basis. They could be used as a test to see if there's like a pilot, and then they can be rolled into the grant for student needs. But you can see in a year, there's quite a few that we have. These are the only ones that are related to spec ed. There's quite a few that are to our board that aren't necessarily spec ed related, but are under the umbrella of priorities and partnership, or PPF funding. So the couple ones that are on this slide here, special education additional qualification, the AQs for educators, that was a smaller one. It was about $16,000 or so. The summer learning spec ed supports, that was about $72,000. And then the tutoring supports. So this was a big one. So it wasn't necessarily all special education. It was more for the board, but special education is definitely impacted by this funding. And this was a significant amount. It was about 1.6 million for 21-22 and an additional 1.6 million or so for 22-23. The next slide is our early intervention math supports for students with special education. That was about 112,000. Professional assessment, systematic evidence-based reading programs, that was about 80,000. And finally, our supporting students with disabilities was about 115,000. So again, these are not things we can count on a year-to-year basis. These are announcements that the ministry makes typically around the time that the GSNs are released. So our expenses, similar, we looked at the revenue over the past number of years. This looks at our expenses going back to our last pre-pandemic year, 2018-19, just as we were looking at it for the revenue. And you can see that our expenses expenses has increased significantly over that period of time. So we were at about 52 million or so back in 18-19. And I should mention that those are our actual expenditures. So 18-19, 19-20, 2020, 2021, and 21-22, those are actuals. So those aren't estimates. That's what our financial statements were for that period of time. The December budget, the ones that say 22-23, those are our estimates. Those are the estimates we have for this year. So you can see that it's a significant increase over that period of time. We've also increased the number of certs. We've increased a significant number of increases in EAs over that period of time. So there's been a lot of additional expenditures over the last number of years. Next slide, please, Adam. So again, I want to just focus on the enrollment side of this, how you can see that our total enrollment in 18-19 was 35,600 or so, and then it's currently estimated for this year around the same amount. But if you look up, our secondary has actually gone up over that period of time. It's been the elementary that's been the concern. So again, that has a direct impact on our enrollment, or sorry, on our revenue as a board, as an institution. So now our shortfall. So you can see here, going back to 18-19 all the way through to our estimates, and that should say December estimates. I just want to make sure that it's not just the June estimates, it's the December estimates. That we've gone from about 2 million or so is roughly where we were, and then we got into the COVID years, and then we started going up from there. So then we were at 4.2, 7.8, and now we're at 11.4. So you can see that it's really not sustainable with our current way of budgeting for special education. So we were talking, Superintendent Ballo and the team were discussing how to look at it. So for this year, we're going to take a different approach. We're going to look at a zero-based budgeting to look at the needs of the organization and then budget accordingly. So it's a little different than how we've done our budgeting in the past. We hope to use a more needs-based, looking at what we need and then budget forward. In the past, it was always adding on to an existing budget. So there could be certain areas of the budget that really aren't being used, but are using up resources, or at least weren't being used, or might have been something we needed 15, 20 years ago that really aren't required today. So that's the purpose of looking at the zero-based, is to kind of look at what we need and then fund it accordingly. So that's at least what we plan on doing for this upcoming year. But it's difficult, everyone, at this point in time to kind of know what our revenue is going to be until the ministry makes that announcement in March or hopefully early April. Typically, they give the priorities for the upcoming year. I know a number of people have advocated very much across the province, not just Halton Catholic, but across the province for special education. So there could be hopefully some additional funding coming over to help with the situation. This problem, everyone, isn't unique to us. Most boards in the province overspend in special education. It's just something, though, with the numbers growing and growing as much as they are, it's something that we have to kind of look at how we're currently doing things and maybe think of a better way to utilize our resources in this area, especially with the declining enrollment we've seen over the last post-COVID years as an organization or as a school board. So when we come back in April, we'll have a much better idea of at least where we are from a funding perspective for the upcoming year for 23-24, as well as some of the priorities that we'll need to look at. So Trustee Agnew, that concludes what we have for tonight. I apologize, we went over by about 10 minutes or so. But there is a lot of information here, and it's a pretty complicated model in the scheme. It's not like your typical with our grant for student needs and such. Our priority, not priority partnership, but our school foundation grant is very different, and our People Foundation grant is a little easier to calculate because it's more 100% enrollment driven, whereas this factors in a lot of other variables into the equation the other areas don't necessarily factor in. So it takes a little more to go through some of the revenue elements and funding elements.
Thank you so much, Aaron and Adam. And I just wanted to say that, this is even for people who have been on SEAC for a while, these are complicated calculations. The amount of information and detail that goes into the calculation of these grants specific to spec ed are not for the faint of heart. And, we bring this to you, as Aaron said, this is just like a little bit of a introduction to what this looks like with a bigger presentation that will be following in the spring. But the reason we do that is so you can have an understanding of how that, the funding models work. But primarily for the reason that, you will be asked, you will have your own inquiries, and you will be asked repeatedly over the number of years that you're serving about supports and programs and why we only have this or why we can't get more of that or whatever that might be. And when Aaron talks about things like the special incidents portion or the SEA claims, those will become more relevant as we go through and we talk about technology and how we provide technology and equipment to our students and how that's funded. And so again, the details can be overwhelming, but I think the idea is just to get as best an understanding as possible about the way that we are uniquely funded. It's different than the way that the entirety of the board budget is comprised and why ours is so specific, and how those monies are allocated. And again, when the team comes back in April, you'll get a better sense of how much is spent on staff, which is a considerable amount of our spec ed budget, but is on staff versus, again, program supplies and all those sorts of things. So it's a lot to digest, especially for people who have not been introduced to this before. Like I said, I still learn. I have a question. I still learn every time you come and present. But that's our intention behind making sure that you're fully aware. And I will also say this too, is that there's sometimes this perception that that we don't have a lot of say as SEAC and that we don't have any input. And I'll tell you, we do. We will have an opportunity, as Aaron said, to fill out a survey that will be coming out tomorrow. But even in our discussions, as we dig deeper into the budget over the course of a number of meetings, our feedback is considered. And I'm gonna call on Rhonda for 1 second. But Rhonda, you have a great example in the past of how conversations around budgets and advocacy to increase some supports for students in deaf and hard of hearing. I want people to sort of hear that example for a second, because it's really important that they understand that we do have a voice here and it is listened to. Could you just sort of briefly explain to people what how that worked when you guys advocated for additional supports?
Absolutely. It was about 5 years ago, maybe more. Brendan at the time, Brendan Brown, was talking about the enrollment in our school boards and how it was increasing, opposite to today. Yeah. Anyway, it was increasing, statistically quite significant numbers. And so I said to Brendan, Brendan, I've been here a long time. For those of you here tonight, I'm like 21 years. And I saw the roster of deaf and hard of hearing teachers drop from 7 to 3. And I said, statistically, we know what the incidence of hearing loss is in our population. And I said, does it make sense to me that our numbers of our teachers of the deaf have dropped from 7 to 3? And it was just something that kind of like slid by the radar. Like nobody really was keeping an eye on it. And it wasn't anything purposeful. It was nothing like, oh, we're gonna take away services from deaf and hard of hearing students. We're not. It was people had retired, people had moved on to different positions. And it was just something that just, it happened kind of naturally and organically, if you will. And then I brought it up at this meeting, one of these meetings, and I said, can we take a look at those numbers? Because I know that by what you're saying, by the increase in students, I know that there's more hard of hearing students out there. And Brendan said, yes, let's absolutely do a statistical analysis of the board. And yeah, indeed, they increased the roster by 2. So they brought that 3 up to 5. And again, it was just something that happened sort of naturally. And because Rick and I are sitting here, keeping an eye on things, if you will, or just, just basically just alerting staff to what's going on and what we feel are important needs for our kids. Yeah, that happened. So
Thanks,
but I've seen really big changes made through other people advocating as well.
Yeah.
So don't underestimate the power of your words here at this committee. So it's really important that you keep everybody informed as to what's happening with your kids. Yeah, our populations.
Thanks, Rhonda.
Now, because I tend to talk a lot.
No, that's perfect. I think it was good. And, again, Aaron's like, you're getting a little, Aaron's getting a little itchy because we're not in a growth mode right now. But having said all of that, I think it's still really important when we're setting budgeting priorities and taking a look at some of those things. Stephanie does take all of that into consideration. That information does come as part of the budget planning. So it's really important. And like I said, this just provides you as SEAC reps some of that information when someone comes to you and says, why don't we have this, or why is this way, that you may have a little bit better understanding of how that budget breakdown is done. And again, we'll have more details in the spring. And please, if any of you want to reach out directly to Aaron or Adam with questions, please, I encourage that. They love talking numbers. They love talking budget. You don't have to go through me. Feel free to ask those questions of them if there's something specific, perhaps to the organization that you represent, or some questions that you have, or you can simply save them until we get together in the spring. But Aaron, I did have a question, and I can't believe I don't know this, and I'm just gonna ask. But when we talk about educational assistants that are not for special education, who are these people? Who are these magical people that I'm curious. Oh, you're muted. No worries.
We looked at that as well too. So there's a little bit of funding, and it's very, very small. And again, it's in the couple $100,000 range. It comes under the Pupil Foundation grant for educational assistance. So obviously there's not much there. So theoretically, a part of that shortfall, that funding would go over to our regular spec ed. But it's in the Pupil Foundation grant. There's actually, if you do the calculation out, there's a little portion that goes for educational assistance.
Okay.
So,
All right.
yeah.
I was like, what's this anomaly? I don't know. No, that is perfect.
Small,
Thanks, Aaron. Because I saw that and I'm like, what?
Yeah.
So thank you. So again, that's helpful information. So I don't know. I'm not putting anyone on the spot. If you don't have any questions, that's okay. If you do, please feel free to put your hand up. If you don't, that's also okay. Yeah, Rick, go ahead.
Thank you, Trustee Agnew. So question just for Superintendent Lofts. So I'm preparing a letter from SEAC regarding special education funding model, and it's tough to wrap my head around a lot of the grants, as you showed there, the allotments that make up the special education grant. Part of the problem I think we have with us, I'm just part of a comment and a question. First of all, if I get copy, are we allowed to have a copy of this presentation? If possible, the numbers are great. It would really be helpful to throw into the letter that I'm preparing. And part of the problem I think with Halton Catholic, I think, is that even though the enrollment is flat, I have ONSYS numbers, which is the numbers of students accessing special education services, has actually gone up from 4,300, give or take, from 1920 up to 5,600, I believe, in 21-22. So that's 25% almost. And the special education grant, because a lot of it's tied to enrollment funding, it's kind of deceiving. Like that, and yes, it's part of the drawback or the challenge with the existing model, is that so much of it relies on enrollment versus special education students, or the services being accessed by the students. I don't know if we can. Sorry, go ahead, Superintendent.
Sorry for. Are you asking me to comment on that then?
Sorry. I was going to ask. I'm sorry. The second part of that was, so in the where there's the budget gaps, and I see them like $7 million and $11 million there. Yeah. Which other funds do you typically would you pull from? I know that the partnership priorities and partnership funding has only been the last 2 years, but it's certainly not enough to cover the shortfall. So how do you normally make up that shortfall?
It's extremely challenging, without a doubt. And you can see it's getting harder and harder, combined with declining enrollment. Right now, to be honest, we didn't make it up. We're in a deficit right now. So we're in about a compliant deficit, but still we were approaching $4 million deficit this past year. which is significant, right? And again, it's part of it is it's a paradigm shift for an organization. When you look at our numbers for enrollment over the last 30 years, it's been a pretty steady trajectory up. COVID has come, and it seems that a lot of boards in the GTA are still struggling with numbers, with enrollment numbers. Some initial, hopefully we start seeing that the corner turn, or turn the corner. We have seen more housing starts, education development charges, things like that should lead to increasing enrollment again. But as it stands right now, we haven't seen that. So where does the gaps come from? We postpone, we defer a lot of elements, a lot of programming items that we had. Not so much programming, but what I mean by that is even facilities. We look at some of the items that in facilities, we maybe pull some things back. We look at essentially this past year, and Superintendent Bala can attest, we went through every line in our budget to find, not just all for spec ed, but as an organization to find the shortfall. So it was a challenging area, and every area of our organization was asked to kind of contribute to helping us get through this period. So there's not one area per se; it's across the entire board that we drew from to help with some of those deficits we see in different areas.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's a huge challenge. Thank you, Superintendent Lofts.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aaron. I don't see any other hands up. Like I said, this is always a lot of processing.
Yeah.
But you guys are always great at trying to, position it as clearly and concisely as possible. And then, yeah, we will share this presentation with SEAC after. And as I mentioned, please feel free to reach out to Aaron or anyone on his team to assist you with any of those questions that you may have. And we will have another presentation come the springtime. So thank you both to yourself and Adam for being here tonight. Aaron, we're very appreciative of that.
And thank you for having us. So we'll see you in a couple months.
Sounds good. Thanks. Okay. Have a great evening. Enjoy.
Take care, everyone.
Careful driving.
Thanks.
Okay, so let me grab. Okay, so we are moving on to item number 4, which is the approval of the minutes. So the minutes of the January 30th, 2023 SEAC meeting will have been also contained in your meeting package for this evening. I don't know if everyone had a chance to take a look at the minutes, but if you did, was there any questions, comments, or concerns with respect to the minutes as presented? Okay, seeing none, I'm wondering if I can get a mover to accept to approve the minutes of the January 30th meeting.
Sure, I'll move it. It's Trish.
Great, so thanks, Trish. That's moved by Trish. And seconded?
I can second it, Brenda. It's Ali.
Okay, great. Thank you, Alan. Seconded. Thank you so much. Okay, so we're moving on to item number 5, which is business arising from previous meetings. And I'll give you a second to catch up, Andrea. Sorry. The business arising from previous meetings chart was included in the package. Some items are marked as complete and have been removed, such as the development of subcommittees, including the Inclusive Recreation Committee. And that will have been because you will have received that form to fill out to be on those committees. So that's why it's been moved from there. Is there any questions at all with respect to the business arising chart? No? Okay. And again, for anyone that is, unfamiliar with that chart, we do try to keep it as updated as possible. When we have some action or some movement on those particular items, we'll make sure that we update that in the status. Sometimes some move quicker, sometimes some move slower. And then when we complete it, it will drop off in its entirety. So if you ever have a question about the business arising or you want to discuss any part of that, please just let me know. It's not a problem. Okay, so moving on, We are moving to item number 6, which is the Special Education Board Policy Review. And I'm probably going to lean on Stephanie, Superintendent Ballo a little bit for this one as well. But we have, I guess, not recently, but over the last number of months, we, back to our last term of SEAC, we did add an agenda item to our meetings where we would bring policies to SEAC for their consideration, their input, their review. And these have been policies that are specific to special education. So things perhaps like service animals or, items like that. And then also policies that may have, sort of that might be applicable to special education, and often those will come forward as well for review and consideration. And so it gives us a great chance again as a group to talk about them as a perspective from the associations that we represent, or some questions or concerns we may have as a special education advisory committee. And then that information is taken and then that's conveyed to the trustees or to staff, whoever's involved in that policy, to make sure that we are reflecting the input from SEAC. So we don't have any this evening, but that is what that section is there for. Superintendent Ballo, am I missing anything with respect to this?
No, thank you. I think you did a great job of talking about what the cycle typically looks like. And I think we started doing it because I used to have the policy portfolio.
Right.
So it was that 2018-19 year. I think it was your first year, and my first year actually. And it came to the policy meeting that it would be really helpful to have members of SEAC provide any input. So each year what we do is we do have a 3-year cycle for policy review. So we'll take a look at those that pertain specifically to spec ed, and then we'll add them to the calendar that we distribute at the beginning of the year so people have a sense of what's coming down over the course of the year. Looking back at the last 3 years, just to give you a sense, and you already gave an example of the service animals, we have reviewed at SEAC our psychoeducational assessment, child abuse and protection, II-29, which is the inclusion and range of placement policy. And that was a really fulsome process. Mental health and well-being is II-44. We reviewed that one as well at SEAC. And our third-party observation, I think we did that one in the fall. They start to blend together. But we really do take the feedback from SEAC, and we have a policy working group and our own staff. So many of the policies that come to SEAC are ones that our department are directly involved in. So our psychologist, our chief psychologist, or our chief social worker, et cetera. And then we provide the feedback to them. And then when we as a team review the changes and the proposed changes to the policy, then we take a look at what's come forward from SEAC. And oftentimes there are really good ideas and suggestions. Sometimes it's like clarifying points. I think sometimes when we live in the land of education, we take things for granted, right? So I think it's really important that people really understand what those policy and documents look like. That's really what our practice has been. And then whenever there's a new policy in the board or a significant amendment that changes the spirit of the policy, we will send that out for stakeholder feedback from our strategic communications department. And that goes out to a variety of different stakeholders, and SEAC itself is a stakeholder group. So when those policies go out, I strongly encourage SEAC to participate in that. And there's a separate link that does go to SEAC. So when we collate that information, we can see what came back from the SEAC group.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And what I will add to that as well is, in addition to the policy creation or the revamping of the policy, whatever might be going on with that particular policy, some of the discussion that ensues, because trustees don't get involved in the development of procedure. That is, a staff operational responsibility. But sometimes there's comments that are made during the review of the policy that actually would fall into the procedure, but staff will take that information and use that as part of their consideration when they're developing the procedure. And so, that's also really helpful, as Superintendent Ballo has said, that lived experience this piece, that other piece that sometimes we are able to offer, and staff is like, yeah, that makes sense from a procedural perspective. Let's go ahead and put that in. So it's kind of a twofold when we're able to discuss some of these policies, in that, again, staff can take some of that feedback, and it may not necessarily fall into the policy the policy itself, but it may fall into the procedural piece. So it does get reflected, and I think it's great that we bring them here for discussion and consideration. Does anybody have any questions at all about that process, about the types of policies that come forward? No? Okay. And if you ever do have a policy that you're uncertain of, or you're not sure if it does reflect, or if it should be coming here, just let us know. Just ask, is this a policy that that would be impacted by our, the students that we represent, and we can certainly have a discussion around that.
Hey, it's Mandy here. I do
Mandy.
have one. Hi. I have one quick question. Just, is there a policy, or how would we find out if there's a policy around therapy dogs?
Yeah.
Because I know that's something that some of the schools have looked into. And then with the pandemic, I think I know of one particular program that had to close down due to COVID and protocol. But is there policies around therapy dogs in schools for children? Or is that something that even falls in this section?
Yeah, for sure. Sorry, I've got a kid screaming in the background.
Oh no.
Sorry. I'm like, I can hear him. Can they hear him? So first of all, what I'll say is just in general, and I can let Superintendent Ballo speak to that specifically, but I will say that for anyone, we can send a link, but for anyone that wants to search our policies, you can do that on our website. So on our board website, is an area that lists all of our policies and accompanying procedures, and you can actually search by search term. So that's a great way to look up those policies. What I'm not sure of, I know that we do have is service animals in the school policy, but I don't know, Superintendent Ballo, if that covers off on therapy dogs as they come in, or if that's specific to the individual that requires the dog. I'm not quite sure.
I can help out a little bit.
Perfect.
So we do have that policy, and it's II 52. And if you go to where Trustee Agnew directed you and gave you some information there, you can see there's a whole list. At the top of the list are all the policies. At the bottom are all of the corresponding procedures. And if you take a look in the procedure that corresponds with that policy, there are different definitions around certified service animals, therapy dogs, therapy animals. So there is information in there that can definitely help. And all of our policies at the top of the policy, they have the associated policies that go with and the associated procedures. So if you go to that one policy, it'll give you a link to all of the other policies and procedures that correspond. And it also includes a list of references. So when we have our policies on our cycle, we go through every reference and we make sure that they're still valid, and then we update it with any new legislation or any new resources. And that's why the 3-year cycle actually is a great model, because it keeps our documents really current.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you, Superintendent Ballo. Okay, I'm going to move ahead then. So we are going to move to item number 7, budget priorities. We just had a great conversation with Erin after that presentation on the budget priorities. So just to reiterate that there will be a budget survey that's going out to stakeholders. Please fill the survey out as SEAC members. It's super important that we get your feedback. It's a great way to do that. And, please, if you can take the time to do that, that would be great. In addition, we do have some time allocated here this evening if we wanted to talk about any budget priorities that you wanted to discuss tonight. And then what we'll do is we'll create a list, and then a form will be sent out after the meeting, also in case members want to add things that maybe they didn't think about tonight. And then, as we were saying earlier, this feedback does help guide the decisions that may or may not be monetary. So sometimes some of the things that we bring forward as a budget priority is actually something that doesn't even have a dollar amount attached to it, that is done in a different way, which is awesome. So just again, even at a high level or basic conversation tonight, does anybody have any thoughts on, some budget priorities that they would like to sort of lay on the table for consideration as we start to have these discussions? And again, there's no pressure. This is like a new thing for a number of you, and that's why we will follow up for people to add things to that. But think about that. It could be maybe specific, as Rhonda gave an example. Specific to the organization that they represent. It was taking a look at those supports specific for students deaf and hard of hearing. Perhaps it's for your particular association, it might be programming, it might be additional educational assistance support, it might be equipment, it could be technology, it might be, things like that. So think about that if you don't have anything immediate this evening, and even go back to your association and say, we're having these conversations at SEAC, we're starting to set some of these budget priorities. What are some things that, you'd like me to bring forward on behalf of your association? So that's another good way to do that, or, talk to other SEAC reps from your association and see maybe what they're thinking.
Can I jump in one more time?
Of course you can,
I do
Mandy,
have something
please.
that actually fits. Thank
Please,
you.
yes,
With
jump
this.
in.
So Halton Down Syndrome Association is currently seeking teachers who are interested in becoming certified in a special program that really benefits kids with Down syndrome, because they learn in their own unique way, and there tends to be similarities in the way that kids with Down syndrome learn to read, which is different than the way that other kids with different abilities might be learning to read, or it can be different. So, but we're doing this sort of in a grassroots, organic way, reaching out through our memberships to teachers, because there's costs involved, and the organization is looking to either subsidize or help support in some way, and then ideally be able to offer programming to our memberships, whether it's this teacher goes on to do private work, but they're certified in this program, or they do something through Halton Down Syndrome Association that is subsidized, and then our membership would put their children through the program. So the reason I'm bringing it up here is because they mentioned the program's a North American program, and they mentioned that schools will often pick up the cost, and once they have done that, if the teacher's certified, they have to buy into the materials, the books, and all the things that kind of go along with the program. So is this something that could be brought forward or presented in a report or shared or proposed as a way to help this specific group of kids with different abilities in getting their reading supports needs met, because it is a little bit specific, and this program, I guess, it has a track record and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Thanks, Mandy. I'll let Superintendent Ballo answer that, and I see you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Sure, thank you. That's a really great example of something that you could include in the form that will be going out, so that you can include more details. But that's a great example of a conversation like this that gives us some guidance around how we can allocate some of our funds, what we can do with some of our professional development. And I really do appreciate those types of examples, because we are always providing professional development to our staff. So when we can get some ideas right from this group as to some of the areas that you see as a need, or you're very well informed with your associations and your own experiences, and sometimes we just don't know. So we always really welcome new ideas like that. And say an example too from the past, we always get great ideas through the survey. Someone raised a comment about French and special education students, and from that idea, we just went with it and did all kinds of professional development with our certs, with our French teachers around how to support students in classes. So really any idea, anything that you've had some thought about that you think would be worth knowing, because it doesn't necessarily equate to a person. As you saw in our budget, we have a lot of staff. It might just be, how do we use the staff that we have, and how can we focus the PD that we're doing as a department. So I really do appreciate those really unique and specialized ideas. So don't hesitate to share those.
Thank you. I will.
No problem.
That's perfect. Thank you. Abiola, you have your hand up as well. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Brenda. I just had a question, just to add on to what Mandy was saying. As regards the budget priorities, I know during while the budget review was going on, I heard that there were some intervention programs that allocated some funding, and I wanted to find out, because some children that have developmental delays, catching up during summer breaks would be very good for them. And I wanted to find out, how are these programs being implemented?
Thank you so much. Stephanie, you want to take a run at that?
Sure,
Great.
sure. I can start, and I can certainly bring some more information back. But we've had a number of different sort of gap closing funds that have come from the ministry. And we did a pretty extensive report actually at a board meeting just last month on closing the gap and all the strategies between our curriculum department, our spec ed department, our mental health and well-being team. And I think it's a really good report. I can point it out and even send it to all of SEAC's Way, because it was really informative, and I had a ton of examples of what we have done as a system to focus on gap closing. The other thing I would offer is the funds that we received for tutoring supports. Those have come in very handy. It was quite a bit of money last year, and then more money for this year. So there's some real specific ways that we've been able to use that money and allocate it to support students with special education needs, and other students as well. But we definitely have examples of programs that we've purchased. We've worked with some third-party providers. We've hired some additional teachers to provide the Empower Reading program across our system. I think this is, I know for sure, we've never had this many schools being able to offer the Empower program, and we've been able to do that with some of the specialized funding that's come from the ministry. So those are some examples where we've had a real focused, intentional approach to filling some of the gaps for our students. And our school staff are amazing at identifying those needs. They know the kids, and they're very willing to work with us when we have an opportunity to provide any additional services to their schools.
Great. Thank you. Did that answer your question, Fabiola?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. So yeah, these are great conversations. I'm so happy to see them transpiring. Please, like I said, when the form comes out, so first of all, the budget survey, and then fill out the form, send us that information, and then we can also continue to have this conversation as well in the spring, in a little more detail. But yeah, these are all fantastic ideas. Trish, go ahead.
Hey, I have a quick question that it's related to budget, but I'm wondering if if you have a specific type of therapy that you're doing with your child and you bring it to the school, if it's done privately, but you're trying to incorporate it into the school, is there a way to have a discussion about some type of funds being provided to assist with this? We're past that now, but I'm thinking if that ever came up. In hindsight, I was like, should I have fought for more of that, or is that even an option?
Would you like me to jump in?
Sorry, yeah, please go ahead.
Sure. I'd say high level. The answer would be that we always take a look at the service providers that we have within our own board. So we're always very cautious to not duplicate any services that we already offer. So if it's a behavior analyst, we already have behavior analysts, and they would be the ones that would provide that service, speech and language. And my chiefs would be very proud of me right now, I know, because we often talk about that duplication of service. But I do think that that's a good question. And if there was an interest in having more discussion about that, we could certainly bring it back. We don't typically pay for a service to come in. We wouldn't typically allocate funds for a specialized service to be provided to a student in our school.
My own personal experience is we did something over the summer months because it was twice a day for an hour each day, and it was occupational to do with inner ear and music therapy, and it was an innovative type of therapy. But that's just one example that I was thinking of. I mean, this was many years ago.
Can I make a point of order, please?
What's your point of order, Maria?
We're not supposed to be talking about personal experiences here.
I understand that. I apologize. That's not what I meant. It was more to say, in my own hindsight, could you have fought for it? So I'm thinking of parents now who are seeking alternative therapies. Can you bring that to the board? Who would you talk to bring it? So forgive me for that.
That's okay. Thank you, Trustee Powell. And also recognizing that you have not been on SEAC before, and we also haven't had the discussion at our table with respect to the SEAC Code of Conduct. So recognizing that.
Appreciate that.
I appreciate that. And thank you for rephrasing that. You know, we definitely can have a similar conversation, I think, about you know, what that would look like, what those additional resources might look like, and if a parent did have an inquiry about how to do that, how they would go about doing that. I think that's what you're trying to sort of
who
get
would you guide them to? Where could you go? Is it just a blanket no? Is it something that is always up for discussion? Or
for sure. Yeah, please go ahead, Stephanie. Yeah,
sure. I would direct a parent or suggest that they communicate with the school principal, and then they would work in collaboration with the special education consultant for that school. And they're very helpful at problem solving and finding answers. And if they don't have the answer, we meet as a leadership team every other week, and it's something that would come back to the table, and then we would get information back to the family, no problem.
Perfect. That's good to know. It's really good to know. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, was there any other questions or comments with respect to this? And if not, we can move on. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for a fantastic conversation. It is so wonderful to hear these ideas flowing and to have this type of engagement. So I'm really excited for it. And again, you know, if you couldn't think of something tonight or it wasn't coming to the top of your head, please feel free to go back to your associations and your organizations, and you can always come back with some of those. So I appreciate that. So moving on. We are moving on to item 7.2, which is to discuss the format for reviewing the special education plan. So I think we touched on it at a previous meeting where, you know, part of our mandate is to review the special education plan. You know, essentially the special education plan is intended to provide both a quick overview of the spec ed services in the board, as well as an accompanying details that support our work throughout the system. So the plan is meant to provide information about special education services and to accurately summarize and highlight key system initiatives, projects, processes that are all there to support students with special education needs and also their families. And the plan is posted in the special education website on our, the special education section of our website. So we do need to talk about how we want to review the plan. This has had many variations over the time that I have been at SEAC, and I'm sure other members can attest to that. And we have not found a perfect formula. However, I will say that the last 2 years, we created a special education plan subcommittee. So the plan is robust, as you can imagine. There's a lot of components to it. Anyone can go through it at any time that they want. But you know, sometimes there are individuals on our SEAC that, you know, are really invested in the spec ed plan and they really want to be a part of reviewing it. And so what we have done, like I said, the past 2 years is we've had a special education plan review subcommittee who reviews the plan, makes suggestions, provides feedback, and then that comes back to us to sort of say, this is what the committee came up, like this is what the committee discussed. These are the items that we had feedback on. These are the things that we highlighted that we wanted to address. And then that comes back to SEAC for discussion. And having said all of that, it doesn't remove the ability for any member of SEAC to provide feedback on, you know, on the spec ed plan itself. So anybody can provide feedback on it, but the idea behind the committee, it lightens the load a little bit, if you will. They dive into it. They do a great job on it. So anyways, I'm just putting that out there for consideration. The other options we have done in the past is where we've sort of taken a section of the plan at each of our meetings and we've gone through it as an entire group. That's also an option. So it really is up to the SEAC committee. If I was going to make a suggestion, I think the special education review subcommittee was amazing. And I don't know, is there anyone here who was on the subcommittee that can maybe speak to that experience? Rick, I think you were on it, weren't you?
Yes, thanks, Trustee Agnew. Yeah, I was on it the last couple of years. The most recent form of the formula we're letting everyone kind of fill out forms, or if they, as they review the special education plan on their own, if they see a section that they would like to augment or something missing, we encourage the members to, like Trustee Agnew said, to kind of put in your thoughts or to suggest new items that can go in a special education plan. It is a pretty robust document. I think it's 100+ pages, including appendices. So it's quite substantial. But I like the new format of using forms to suggest changes, who's suggesting changes, the justification for changes. It really works well, and then we bring it back, all the changes back to the subcommittee meetings, and essentially incorporate them. I don't think it's very often where suggestions aren't incorporated. Maybe modify the wording a little bit, but for the most part, it goes in as suggested from the members. So I think it's a really effective way of allowing everyone to kind of do it at their own pace. We give, you have a deadline to submit your forms or your comments within the form, and then we meet I think once or twice perhaps, and put those changes in. But no, it works out really well.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Rick. Maria, you have your hand up?
Well, I was just going to say, I was also on the subcommittee. I don't think I was on it last year, but the year before, and I've been through the process under many different formats. And I think that the subcommittee is probably the most efficient way. It allows people to participate as much or as little as they would like in the process. So I would agree. I think it's a good way to move forward, not opposed to other considerations, but I think of all the formats I've seen, I do think it's been the most effective as well.
Thanks. So does anybody here on our group tonight, do you have a preference? We do need to decide, only so that we can do planning as we move forward, whether or not, we're going to have a subcommittee so that we can go out for people who want to be a member of it, or if we're going to incorporate it into our meeting. So what are the thoughts? Happy to get your feedback on how you'd like to proceed. Are people comfortable with the idea of a subcommittee again, or would you like to do it in another manner? It doesn't have to be formal. You can just shout it. Okay. Yep. Go ahead, Trish.
Does it take like a time frame in a meeting? What would you say if we were to go through it in meetings? Is it?
I mean, yeah.
Okay.
It takes a long time. It's okay. It takes a long time because you're reviewing it in its entirety. Even if it's section by section, you're reviewing it in its entirety. So we would actually probably dedicate, we'd almost have to dedicate at least one full meeting to it, and maybe a little bit extra. Trying to think back. But yeah, it definitely, going through it as a group at the table, sort of page by page or section by section, it definitely is time consuming. It's not a bad way of doing it. It is time consuming. Anyone else have any thoughts on that? I mean, in the absence of other suggestions, I would suggest that we do the subcommittee if the members of SEAC are in agreement with that approach. Then I would go ahead to take the steps to put that committee forward. Yeah, thumbs up I'm seeing. Okay. Okay, perfect. Let's do that then. It worked really well. And we can always change it up next year if we feel like we wanted to have it to be a little more robust. Okay, great. I'm just taking keeping an eye on the time here, being respectful of everyone's time. Okay, so moving on to item 7.3 is the results of the survey forms. So thank you to those who did fill out the forms with respect to subcommittees and things like that. So the results for the presentations for SEAC, the subcommittee and board committee members were included in the meeting package. And the names of those SEAC members that did volunteer for board committees have been forwarded to those committees for meeting invites. So you should start receiving invites or information on those committees when that starts happening. For the pro-grant speaker, we didn't have a ton of participation. So we only received 4 people that actually submitted their suggestions or their ideas on the pro-grant speakers. And so the results were 2 people for Dr. Joy Lawson, 1 for Mike Shorman, and 1 for Kyle Scott. So what I can do is, if it's okay with SEAC, what I was thinking is because we had, oh, I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead. Sorry, thanks so much, Andrea. Here's the information on the board committees for anyone that. Thank you for that. Was there any questions on that? I'm jumping right ahead. I'm so sorry. No, good. Okay. Sorry about that. I just got excited for the pro-grant speaker for a second. So what we can do is for the pro-grant speaker, like I said, Dr. Joy Lawson received 2 votes, and then Kyle was 1 and Mike was the other. What I was going to suggest is, why don't I reach out to Dr. Lawson? We have $3,500 to work with. I was going to reach out to see availability and cost. And then depending on that, if the cost doesn't take up the whole amount, perhaps we could even have 2 speakers. And what we could do is I could come back out to SEAC and say, okay, between these 2, who would you like to see between Mike Shorman and Kyle Scott? And then I could reach out to that individual to see if they would also be amiable to doing a presentation to us. And maybe we can get 2 pro-grant speakers for the price of 1. So that's what I was thinking about doing. So anyways, I just wanted to get feedback from the committee members on that, if you think that would be an okay idea. Yep, thumbs up, thumbs up. Okay, perfect. So I'll go ahead and do that reach out then this week to find out if I can get some costing and availability, and I'll communicate that back to the committee. Okay, and then we can jump ahead and start doing some planning. Thank you. Okay. So, Andrea, you're so good. Okay, so let me go to my next. Okay, so here were the results for the presentations. We also did ask you what kind of presentations you wanted to see. As we had talked before in a previous meeting, we definitely want feedback from SEAC. What is it, we always have the presentations that we bring forward to you that are sort of those standard presentations or information that's happening at the board we want to share. But we want to know from you, what do you want to hear? So here was the feedback on the following SAC presentations at SEAC meetings that we had come through. So reading intervention, a whole bunch here. Fetal alcohol syndrome disorder. So what we'll do is we will take these, and Stephanie, please jump in if I miss something, but we will take these. We'll take a look at them. We'll see where they fit into the upcoming meetings as far as agendas and staff availability. There might very well be some of these that have already been planned already, and we'll take a look at those to see if they've already been planned in some capacity. And then if not, we'll take a look. And some of these might end up here, I'm looking at student mental health and well-being. Sometimes that pairs up with the tiered model of intervention. But we'll take a look at these and try to put as many of these as possible onto upcoming meetings. And whatever we don't get to for this SEAC year, we can definitely add to the planning. And we do that at the beginning of each school year, where we present SEAC with sort of a breakdown of what the meetings look like and some, where presentations will be slotted in. So we can do the same thing with these presentations. Good? Okay, perfect. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Andrea. Okay, so where are we here? All right, perfect. So we are moving to item number 8. So board committee updates. I don't know that there has been any of these meetings. We were supposed to have had a bullying intervention, bullying prevention and intervention committee, but the snow day had other ideas, so that didn't happen. Andrea, we don't have a rescheduled date, I don't think, for that yet, do we?
I didn't receive anything.
Okay.
Not
yeah.
yet.
Okay, perfect. So we don't have that yet, but that will be happening. I don't know, Maria, have you participated in any de-streaming or Journeying with Jesus committee meetings?
So I haven't heard anything from the de-streaming committee. There was a Journeying with Jesus committee meeting today, but I was unable to attend because I was actually driving home from Atlantic City, which was fun for the last few hours. But I did sort of share, what our maybe some concerns might be from a SEAC perspective in terms of ensuring that mobility issues are taken into consideration when planning the event. I think I was thinking of the old format where everybody went to one location, whereas now I think the event occurs at the different schools. But the chairs were very appreciative of that being brought forward and offered to ensure that the language that goes out to the school principals is reflective of that sort of thing. So that's about as far as I've gotten so far on that committee, but I was happy to be able to share that and was very happy with how well it was received.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then any other committees that we end up having representation on, we will add to this board committee update so that we can make sure that we're updating SEAC on anything that's happening from a SEAC representation perspective. Okay, so moving along to communication to SEAC. So item 9.1 is Superintendent Ballo for the superintendent report. So please go ahead.
You and through you, Madam Chair. We have a number of updates this evening. On February 15th, we started our recruitment for our 3rd cohort of Project Search and the interns. We are looking for new interns. Applications for the 23-24 are now open and that it closes on March 9th. So it's been a really successful program over the last couple of years, and we're looking forward to having a new cohort of students for September. A recorded presentation is available for viewing on our HCDSB YouTube channel. We've initiated a new math intervention project, which has 36 different groups across our elementary schools taking part. And all of our ESC classrooms, our essential skills classes, are running an intervention group based on the program that's called Do the Math. And for our STC classes, we have purchased Equals Math. This new resource supports students with functional math. We have provided professional development and release time for our teachers to support the implementation of this resource. We did share with you a flyer a few weeks ago, I believe. There are sensory-friendly masses that are starting at Mary Mother of God Parish in Oakville on the 2nd Sunday of the month at 3 p.m. So we certainly, try to advertise that as much as we possibly can. The 11th annual HCDSB Life Skills Prom will be the evening of May 18th at Notre Dame Secondary School. So this is a save the date. This is a dinner and a dance for the life skills students, best buddies, volunteers, and staff from across the HCDSB for an evening of dinner, dancing, and friendship. SEAC members are invited to attend, and Andrea Hughes will send the invitation following the meeting this evening. With regards to professional development, we held our 2nd secondary life skills teachers and elementary structured teaching class teachers, a CLC, so a community of learning for those staff. Some of the topics that were involved included outdoor education, job launch programs, mental health resources, My Blueprint, community pathways, the Equals Math program that I mentioned, and Project Search intake process. On February the 9th, Andrew Cordero, who is one of our iCerts, led a presentation about pathways planning, supports for life skills students at a guidance subject council meeting. So really a great opportunity to collaborate with other departments. The discussion items included our family transition guide, a life skills pathways infographic, and career planning supports for community pathways in My Blueprint. On February the 10th, James McGinnis, ICERT, led an equals math training session for elementary STC sets. Our STC, structured teaching class sets, will be piloting the use of this new resource in their schools. 2 of our CERTs attended a virtual presentation on supporting successful transitions from elementary to post-secondary and beyond, offered by the Regional Assessment and Resource Center that is housed at Queen's University in Kingston. The February CERT elementary meeting, the agenda items included a presentation from our psych staff on the MID learner and information updates from the special education department. Our secondary CERT meeting, we have pulled all of our CERTs from our secondary schools in 1 of 2 days. We have repeated the session, so this is for secondary CERTs, not necessarily specific to secondary, I would say. So the agenda items include the MID learner profile and a presentation on accommodations for anxiety from our psych department, the IEP toolkit, FASD transition to secondary and supporting de-streaming, MID infographic, which is a new infographic, and discoverability. And the next session is on March 2nd, which is a repeat of the one that we just held. And lastly, the Deaf and Hard of Hearing team attended the Supporting Success for Students with Hearing Loss online conference, and we're grateful to the work that they're doing. Lastly, on January 30th and 31st, assist training was provided by 2 of our social work trainers with 15 participants. The Mental Health and Addictions Action Plan has 4 key priorities. The 3rd priority is the tiered model of intervention, and within that is the priority is a goal on assist training for our staff. And our social work staff continue to work with schools to provide support in the area of equity and inclusion, which involves teacher-led lessons on supported by the social worker at the school. So those are all of my updates since we've met last. We've had quite a bit of professional development taking place. Thanks to the teams who have been responsible. That's all we got.
That's all you got, Stephanie? I mean, come on. You couldn't
That's it.
You couldn't have put anything else in there?
No, that's it. It's been a slow month. February where nothing happens and everything happens. But yes.
In the shortest month.
That's right.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, I say it every single meeting, but always so appreciative of the updates and always continue to be amazed at the amount of involvement and engagement of our spec ed staff and the programming and everything else. So thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions on what was presented in the superintendent's report? Maria?
So it's not a question regarding the report, and I'm sorry, I just joined the meeting not very long ago. So maybe this has already been discussed, but I just wanted to congratulate Superintendent Ballo on her amazing new appointment, but also tell her how much she will be very much missed.
Yeah, so we hadn't discussed it yet.
Okay,
we were going to wait to the end of the meeting. That's okay. Catch out of the bag.
Thank you.
Yeah. So for anyone who wasn't aware, Superintendent Ballo has very sadly provided her letter of resignation. She will be leaving for an amazing opportunity with the ministry, but certainly our board and our special education department will be at a great loss with you leaving. So, as Maria said, people here, a lot of people haven't had a chance to work with you for very long. I've had the privilege and pleasure of working with you for a number of years, and I'm very, very grateful, Stephanie. You've done an extraordinary job in special education. We'll be very, very sad to see you go. So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations. It's exciting news for you, and it's amazing opportunity, just our loss.
Thanks, Brenda, and thanks, Maria, for your kind words as well. It's always tough when you leave something that you love, but I also feel really blessed that I just work with the best group of people, and I appreciate all the work that SEAC does as well. It's just such great work, and taking an opportunity with the Ministry of Education in an area that still involves special education and being able to be part of the amazing things that are happening at our provincial and demonstration schools is really a great opportunity. And it's just the perfect fit because I'm very passionate about spec ed, and I get to take on a leadership role that's very focused on supporting, a variety of learners. So yeah, I definitely will miss the board. This is my 30th year with the board. And when I read that, I'm like, how is that even possible? But it is. So definitely when I say it's like home, it's been home my whole career. So yeah, thank you so much. I really do appreciate that. And I'm leaving everybody in great hands. I've got a great department around me and great schools, and thanks.
Yeah, we will definitely be tracking your goings on, if you will, when you get there. And again, wishing you all the very best success and luck. Not that you need it, but they're very lucky to have you. So
thank you.
So thanks again. Okay, we're going to move to the trustee report. So Trustee Powell, you're up.
Sure. Okay. And yes, you will definitely be missed, Superintendent Ballo, but take it to the next level. That's where you can do a lot. Hey.
Thank you.
So thank you. So we just had our regular board meeting last Tuesday on the 21st. I have some pretty cool details about, we had a STEAM presentation by Matt Kovacs, I think his name is. He's the curriculum consultant for K-12 for STEAM. And I'm going to share it after if we want to put it. I don't know if you want me to send it out, but there's some really neat dates in there too, because there are some really interesting things going on. Like there's a STEAM showcase coming up March 8th. Elementary STEAM Week is April 17th to 21st. A Minecraft tournament would go over well in a lot of houses. April 19th. Career Expo for girls in skilled trades, and OYAP, the Ontario Youth Apprenticeship Program, combined with a STEAM program, is in June. So I'm gonna share it because I think there's a lot of really neat dates for us to look at.
Yeah, please do.
And it kind of breaks it down too. I'm conscious of time, so I won't go into detail, but for example, like they shared that coding starts in grade 1 and it goes up to grade 9. So I actually didn't know it was going on that young. Grade 1, that's incredible. Esports, there's been an esports tournament in January that was at both the elementary and the secondary schools. And it's the first tournament that both elementary and secondary can compete together. It's never been done before. So I thought that was really neat. Reintroduction of robotics. We now have a second team. There was only one team for a long time at Holy Trinity, and now there's a second one at Loyola. So I was really impressed with what is going on in STEAM and how active we are as a board. So I'll share that, like I've said quite a few times now. What else went on? We had policy, an action item just around delegating to the board. I know a number of us have delegated before, so we're just trying to tweak that and make it as user-friendly as possible. And so a number of friendly changes were made to the amendment, but based on information from our parliamentarian, the proposed changes, the proposed wording didn't quite meet the bill. So the amendment failed, but we're still working on trying to make it work for everybody, because delegations are a huge part of making change. So we had a really good student trustee update. They just had their elections for the 23-24 school year. They're passing a motion to host a climate symposium in, I think it's the end of April. They're doing a lot of really neat things. They're also sharing their concerns. They did a survey in the schools, and at the last Senate meeting, I'll read what they said because I thought this was interesting. This is what they said in their report. At the last Senate meeting, some student senators raised concerns regarding diverse staff and asked us to refer these concerns to the board. As one student said, there is a very big gap between culturally diverse students and monotone staff diversity. There is ignorance and cultural deafness in the classroom setting because staff and students have different lived experiences. So I know, well, you know what, I won't get into that. I just think it's important that we're all looking at different areas and seeing how we can listen both with special needs, with what the students are saying. So we can keep listening. We are still talking about school cafeterias. I know that's an issue in a lot of schools. It's ongoing, it's being addressed. They are looking at what else they can do. And the new constructions of the schools, that was a big one too. So they will be having, Andrea, Ms. Swindon is going to be putting up links on our school websites to just better communicate construction updates on what is going on with the school construction. And that's it in a few minutes or less. So any questions?
Yeah, thank you so much. Trustee Powell, is there any questions on the trustee report? No? Good, yeah, and that's perfect. If you want to send along those dates for information on the STEAM activities, I think that's fantastic. It was so much to learn about, and the work that's being done with STEAM is pretty awesome. So yeah, please send that along, and if anybody has the opportunity to attend or visit or learn more, I would encourage you to do that. Thank you very much for the report. So moving on to item number 10, we have SEAC discussion items or questions. Does anybody have anything they want to bring forward for SEAC discussion? No? Okay. So meeting summary and next steps, a couple of things that we will be doing. Like we said, look out for the budget survey that's going to be coming. I'm going to do some follow-up around the program piece. Trish is going to send out the information on the STEAM stuff. If anybody, we will be sending a form around to gather additional input from you with respect to the budget priorities. So keep an eye out for that. Think those were the big follow-ups. Probably have to go back and listen to the meeting again to make sure I didn't miss anything. Our next meeting is Monday, March the 20th, and we'll be starting that meeting at 6:30. The meeting will be happening in the boardroom. And the reason it's starting early is we will be doing the Spirit of Inclusion Awards presentation. For anyone who has not been a part of that, it is amazing. It is one of my favorite events of the year. It's happening in person. We will be recognizing the Spirit of Inclusion Award winners, and we do a little bit of a meet and greet with the winners and their families and some of the staff that comes. It's often a very full room. It's a great feel-good event, and I'm really, really excited about it. So that's happening March 20th at our next meeting, starting at 6:30. The meeting agenda will also include the SEAC meeting dates for 2023-2024, policy II-13, which Stephanie had mentioned, the psychological assessment of individual students, sections of the code of conduct for review, and the psychological assessment wait time update will be in the superintendent report. So that is all happening on March the 20th. We did receive regrets from a few of our members this evening. So I will need a resolution for absenteeism. Resolve that Jessica Lim, Tracy Veal, Tiana Aruda Nunes be excused. Can I get a mover for that?
This is Rick. I'll move it.
Oh, thanks, Rick. So moved by Rick and seconded by Trish. Thank you so much. So that has been carried. Sorry, what did I miss? Andrea, did I miss something? Just jump in. Oh, Angela, sorry.
Just Angela Santos
Okay,
too.
sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Okay, we'll add Angela to the resolution for absenteeism. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so adjournment and closing prayer. So I just need a motion to adjourn.
Sure. Motion.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So moved by Trish and seconded Abiola.
Yes, please.
Okay. Yes. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So if you'll join me in our closing prayer in the sign of our faith, in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Blessed are you, O God of all creation. Each day you spread before us the rich and wonderful diversity of the human family, created in the divine splendor of your love. Fashioned in your image, you call us to love one another with the same tender care with which you brought us to creation. Each one of us is but one small part of the glory that is you. As we serve the students and families of the Halton Catholic District School Board on the Special Education Advisory Committee, fill us with your grace, guide us with your wisdom, and give us the strength and courage to do your work, so that it may always be said of our every act, God saw that it was good. Amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Thank you, everyone, for a fantastic meeting. Thank you for being flexible enough that we could move this online. If anyone is traveling tonight, please be safe. And I look forward to seeing everyone at our next meeting. So have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.